Hey everyone, Dakota here. A quick heads up before you listen to this episode. We actually recorded this in the spring of 2018, and then it sort of sat on a shelf while no one edited it. I'm telling you this because if you hear someone refer to the AMS annual meeting, it's actually the one that happened in 2018 and not the most recent one in Phoenix in 2019. Enjoy.
This is AMS on the Air. I am Irene Sands.
I'm Jeff Rosenfeld.
And I'm Dakota Smith. We're ready to podcast with the AMS about all things weather, water, and climate.
And, giant icebergs breaking is cool, and penguins jumping in the ocean is cool. And a whole lot of people get into weather. And how many people get started on weather because it's just, wow, look at that. We just need to keep reminding ourselves that when you're really deep in the differential equation, that this is going to save somebody's life and help their well-being.
Welcome to episode 5 of AMS on the Air. Today we're talking with Richard Alley, a professor of geosciences at Penn State University.
Richard studies ancient climates as revealed in ice cores. He's also one of the world's leading experts on behavior and changes of ice sheets and glaciers. Along with his influential research, Richard is a fantastic communicator.
He hosted the video series Earth, the Operator Manual, and has given countless number of talks, a few of which I've seen that are always eye-catching and leaving you wanting more.
We were honored to interview Richard after his keynote talk in the Presidential Forum at this year's AMS meeting. Here's a snippet of his presentation.
I was not an early adopter of cellular telephones. I like to think, and I didn't want people bothering me. But the day came, right? So I was going to give one of these public talks down in Baltimore at the museum. There was a little bit of snow. I'm in State College in Pennsylvania. It's 170 miles to Baltimore. I drove to Baltimore. Right? So they called my wife about 20 minutes after I left, and they said, it's too dangerous, we're closing. And I didn't have a cell phone, right? This used to happen. You young people may not realize this, but this used to happen. So I get to Baltimore, and I go to the museum, and it's closed. And I finally succeed in finding a payphone, and I call my dear wife, and she says, you are getting a cell phone. Okay, so now I have a cell phone, right? So it's a fascinating thing to do. If you go into a public school and you go to a 5th grade and you say, okay, what is this? And they'll say, oh, it's your phone, or it's your cell phone, or it's your smartphone. And with mine, somebody sitting up front will say, oh, it's sort of little, and it's old. You're not very cool, are you? Right? And then say, what's it made of? And if it's a 5th grade class, after a moment of pause, some bright student will say, cell phone parts? And then you say, what are cell phone parts made of? Right? And you know the answer to this, but I'm going to do it for you, right? So there's a little bit of sand in here to make the glass and pull the silicon out to make the chip. And there's a little bit of some sort of organic matter like oil to make the plastic. And there's a very careful selection of rocks. Not these, actually, but the ones with the palladium and the rare earth elements and what have you. And that's really all this is, right? Is sand, oil, and rocks, plus science and engineering, and a little bit of design and marketing. And I want you to do a mental picture for me. Suppose that you put together a do-it-yourself cell phone kit. And there's pictures of it up there for you, right? So here's a do-it-yourself cell phone kit. And suppose you took that and you started giving it to certain groups. A bridge club, or the football team, or the U.S. Senate, just as random choices. And you said, okay, turn that into a cell phone. Right, so I will speculate, this is speculation, but if you were interested in reading, let's say, Shakespeare, and you had a choice of waiting for the Senate to make a cell phone, or you could get a bunch of monkeys on typewriters to type randomly, I'll bet a lot of you would bet on the monkeys. This is such a fantastic thing. And, again, I'm sure you all know this, but I'm not sure all of your relatives and friends do. Right, there's a computer in here, actually a rather good one even in this old phone. The computer is based on transistors, ultimately. The transistors are invented by Bell Labs, that bastion of free enterprise that happened to have a government-granted monopoly. When they first get the transistor, it was not actually competitive with the tubes they had. How do you commercialize the thing? A lot of the money came from the Air Force because they knew they needed something that was a little more stable than tubes were. And the computer's designed with quantum mechanics. And the quantum mechanics, goes back to people like Bohr and Feynman who taught at universities. And this thing is connected, it's turned off, but if it were turned on, it would promptly connect to the internet. And the first time I logged onto the internet, and this dates me, there's a few people who did this too, right? It was the ARPANET. It was the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Defense Department. We've been trying for years now. Cindy and I are trying to live with one car. I ride my bicycle and she drives the car. And if I drive, Cindy tells me where to go, but there's a nice lady in her phone that tells her where to go. And the nice lady knows where to go because she's got GPS, right? And so this is a picture of my late advisor at Ohio State, Ian Willens, and sitting next to him there is a GPS in Antarctica. When I first met GPS, he was surveying the motion of Antarctic ice streams so we could understand what they do. And he had to collect the data, and then he had to bring them home and post-process them. Because the data had what was called selective availability. They were dithered. Because the ability to locate yourself precisely in real time was considered a national security issue, because this is a Defense Department thing too. Right? And now I do flow of ice sheets, and I do history of climate, and I'm a Newtonian physicist. I didn't take quantum, I didn't take relativity, but my understanding is that the nice lady in the phone using the GPS is using both general and special relativity. Because down here, she is deeper in Earth's gravity well, and she's moving slower than the clocks on the satellite. Okay, and the correction from relativity is about 10 kilometers a day. And she can do 10 meters pretty easily, which means that if she didn't have relativity, she would get lost in about 2 minutes. Right? And we get where we're going not only because of quantum mechanics, but also because of Einstein. I've been working on ice since 1977, the summer after my freshman year. My teachers in geology and other things, I think if you'd ask them what's sort of the most useless esoteric science you can think of, they might have said relativity and quantum mechanics. And you've got relativity and quantum mechanics in your phone, in your pocket, and you can't really think of living the life you now live if we didn't understand relativity and quantum mechanics. They are absolutely essential for our day-to-day living the way we do it. Where did we get them? They came from public-private partnerships built on university research with domestic and military applications. This is public-private, neither one or the other, it's both. It is based on university research, and it has national security as well as economic applications. And I'm not convinced that all of our fellow citizens quite have that loaded anymore.
You can hear the rest of the presentation on YouTube. The link is in the description of this episode. And if you get a chance to watch it on YouTube, of course, you will find that Richard set an AMS record for the number of penguins shown in a given talk.
Penguins were great.
Yeah, can't miss. He has a way of communicating through verbal descriptions, too, that are very colorful, right? I mean, he has a way of making concepts very simple, and he paints a picture of himself as, a deceptive picture of himself as being very, very simple-minded too sometimes. Like when he was talking about his use of telephones and how he didn't understand quantum mechanics behind the phone, and it just was sort of disarming. I love the way he's so disarming, and then he hits you with a key concept at the same time.
And I think that's what makes him relatable. And I think that's one of the key points that he, in the presidential forum, that he pointed out. I mean, a lot of people don't know a living scientist. He pointed out 70% of people surveyed do not know a living scientist. And some polls even are higher. So I love the way how he said, in order to tell a good story, you have to interview, in this case, or talk to the real people. So in the program that he made, called The Earth, the Operator's Manual, he interviewed the admiral, he interviewed the mayor, the farmer. And yes, a lot of people might not know that scientist, but most people have seen their local mayor or their farmer or, you know, their health club's owner. So I think that's, as communicators, I think that's, it's hard to get those people to talk about the hard subjects, quote unquote, or the subjects that maybe they don't want to talk about because they don't want to be perceived a certain way. But I think there are ways of telling the story differently, but making your point across.
He gave me a really good feeling because, you know, in the middle of the talk, you were sort of starting to get this pile of reasons why communicating about climate change is very hard. There's this resistance out there. There's misinformation out there. People have biases that come from having learned their science too long ago. and so the idea of climate change caused by humans is still very foreign to them because it wasn't what they learned when they were younger. And then amidst all this negativism, he started pulling out a really positive message, which is basically partly this idea that we can rely on other voices, that we have to rely on other voices, and we can mix the science message with them because science is helping people every day. We carry it in our pockets, we listen to the weather forecast, we use it. I mean, he made that wonderful point that so many people are skeptical about climate change and the human sources of it, but at the same time, so many people are really gung-ho about the solutions to climate change. They just don't realize that this contradiction exists, that they're not willing to listen to the message necessarily that the scientists are producing, saying that humans are causing it, and yet they're very willing and very, very eager to see solutions. So he mapped out all of these positive ideas, that we need to have a positive message. We have a positive message. We can send a positive message, and there's a lot of hope there if we're willing to tell our stories.
I think, yes, it's hard to come out with something positive when talking about something so negative. I mean, we're talking about climate change, or if you're talking about sea level rise, if you're talking about global warming, if you're talking about extreme drought, extreme downpours. I mean, it's hard because you're talking about people's houses, people's land, people's food, people's living just regular day type of thing. And it honestly, it's something that I deal with and that I struggle with. So this talk made me realize a little bit more, okay, what's another approach that I can take? And talking to people, I think the average resident, he or she probably gets inundated by, okay, but what can I do besides recycling? Is there something else that I can do that's easy, that's not going to take me out of my routine, and what can I do?
Yeah, he made it really clear that if you have the right people conveying the message, whether it's someone people respect because they're in the military, or they're their local doctor, or the mayor, or they're farmers who they know, people they know can convey very clearly, hey, science works for me. I do this, and if it weren't for science, I couldn't do this. Whether you're in the military or you're a farmer who adjusts your harvesting based on the weather forecasts that you're given. So many people interact with science every day and understand how important it is to them. So he connected that very, very clearly. It's like there are these stories. We have positive messages even about climate change. Even the IPCC, the way he framed it, is a positive message. It's saying to people we can have better jobs, more security, a better environment, and here's how. And laying it out as a positive message, I think, was the thing he bequeathed to us at the presidential forum. He turned what sounded like such a Debbie Downer kind of message into something positive, and that's the trick that I think he can do. Just like putting a penguin image up there, which he did so often. I mean, he obviously loves penguins. He probably knows more penguins than most of us could ever imagine knowing, because he's worked in the cold regions of the world more than most people or most scientists. But that just the idea of mixing these light and positive messages that everyone connects to through images, he was sort of making that same point, that you can be positive even when you're talking about something that sounds like it's a real negative, because there is a positive aligning to it. So yeah, it was very, very uplifting.
So hey, let's listen to the one-on-one interview with Richard Alley.
Right, so I'm nobody, right? I'm a geologist, and I do ice, and ice is fun, and geology is fun, and I got dropped into general education teaching very early on. And if you have 200 students in a room, it's really easy to bore them. And so you have to look for the connection, and they like a lot of the things that we like. And, giant icebergs breaking is cool, and penguins jumping in the ocean is cool. And a whole lot of people get into weather. And how many people get started on weather because it's just, wow, look at that. And so it's simply sharing that which motivates us. And I don't know why there are some people, some of us even, who say, I shouldn't show how excited I am about this. I have to be scholarly. No, this is cool, right? And we're into this because it's good. Then why are you in this?
Exactly, it's cool.
It's cool, right? And so it's simply sharing that. And then the fact that it's cool and it helps people. And that by knowing these things, we can find ways to use that knowledge. And we always find ways to use knowledge.
So are you saying that you wouldn't necessarily be just as enthusiastic if we were talking about accounting? Let's say I thrust you into a general accounting course. Would you communicate the same way?
I would certainly try to find where accounting, right now I couldn't tell you how I could find the story of accounting being really cool, but there's got to be something that is. And so you've got to look for that thing that motivates you, the thing that motivates other people and makes it work. And you raised this huge point, which is that so much of what we do involves techniques, but so much of why we're motivated by it is the history that we've seen. And the starting almost anything from the neat things in the past. And, in some very real sense, we wouldn't be here without accounting, too. Because you have to, if you're going to have trade and you're going to own land and you have to have that accounting. It is an essential thing. And maybe reminding people of that will get them excited enough to go do accounting well.
So that first class you TA'd back in, I don't know, was it Wisconsin, or I'm not sure where you were at the time. What did you do wrong as a teacher, do you think? What did you learn from those early experiences?
Right. So I started TAing at Ohio State, and then went to Wisconsin. And I probably did almost everything wrong. Probably the biggest fault that I had early, and I think it's a fairly common one, is the commitment to teach everything. And the being slave to the content. And, you have to memorize Mohs hardness, and you have to memorize all of the periods of the geologic chart, and you have to memorize easy. So it's very clear that we can overwhelm people with facts. There are certain narrow times and places that might be useful, but in general, it's much better to slow down a little, find out where they are, find out where they want to go, and see if you can help them to get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, science is a process, right? It's not just a set of facts. It's a way of getting at things rather than a thing itself, right? So in a way, isn't that part of what you're communicating, is that science is not just a bunch of facts if you're not totally committed to every little bit of memorization that has to be done?
I hope so. It is. I mean, really, what is science, right? It's the human yin to understand. It is the human effort to understand. And then modern science adds to that. We agree to play by a set of rules that makes it as hard as possible for us to fool ourselves. And this is things like peer review and telling people what we did and letting people beat us up before we can publish. So, this is one of those painful things. You have this brilliant idea and you love it and you send it to the journal and the journal sends it to your colleagues who beat it up. And so it's what humans have always done with this overlay of let's make it hard to fool ourselves and then it will be hard to fool other people. And that's the only thing that sets science apart from everything that people have always done, is agreeing to those rules that make it hard to fool ourselves. And then getting these wonderfully bright people who are willing to commit their lives to doing it, to something that they thought was cool.
So what ways do scientists communicate in a way that's kind of fooling people about science? Are they presenting it honestly when not just the facts and the findings, but just how they present what science is? Do they sometimes lead people astray, and how?
Yeah, I suspect that none of us are trying to lead anyone astray, but I think sort of the omniscient scientist, here's the answer. Telling that without telling just how much pain and agony went into getting it and what the path was to there and what you learned on the way gives a very warped view. And I can show you a history of climate, but if I don't tell you about my PhD melting the first time, you've missed something. This was ice cores, and it is true. My first PhD melted.
Was it in a freezer that failed?
It was in a freezer that failed in shipment with a federal agency that has never yet failed again. That was the only time that ever happened, but it had a moment.
So I understand that science is a struggle, and that apparently scientists are very pugilistic too, at least in peer review. How does the public take it when they see science as a struggle rather than as just the work of geniuses who sit around and come up with great ideas?
Well, I hope that they take it better. I'm not sure that they always do. Sometimes people who are trying to confuse the public will latch on to the internal struggle and use that to somehow discredit science, that because we're having this internal struggle to improve our knowledge, that maybe the knowledge isn't good. I've never seen that applied to an athletic triumph. Right? The people are struggling to do the best, and the winner comes out. It is a winner that is battle-tested and hardened and has met all challenges to win. And I have never seen anyone say, wow, that was a really hard Super Bowl game, so we should discredit the winner. It's sort of flabbergasting. And so I think ultimately the fact that we work so hard to make sure that the knowledge is right, that we struggle internally in science, that we go round and round between write it, review it, write it, review it, write it, review it, can't you get this published now, means that what comes out is really good.
Yeah. It also, with athletic contests too, I mean, there's some athletes you sort of admire as super talented to the point where I could never be like Michael Jordan. Well, and I know I could not be like Michael Jordan, but even if I were an aspiring basketball player, I wouldn't even try, right? But we also know from sports that every new generation does it a little better, right? And so how is this related to attracting young people to sciences if we don't present the struggle? Because the struggle means that I can do it too if I'm willing to undertake.
You can do it too, and you can do it better. I mean, I as a professor, one of my jobs is to try to help students trample over me. right? They are supposed to find what I missed. They are supposed to find what I did wrong. They are supposed to improve it. And the idea that science is hugely useful, hugely valuable, hugely improvable is one that some people have difficulty with, but it is. So Newton figured out a lot of physics. And eventually, Bohr and Einstein figured out things that Newton had missed. And that did not throw away the value of Newton. What it did was open new doors for fantastic things that we could do in addition to Newton. So when I study the flow of a glacier, I use Newton's physics. I do not write a quantum wave function for the glacier, nor do I make a correction to the velocity for the relativistic effects of what it's doing. But Newton couldn't get us to a GPS or a computer. We needed relativity and quantum mechanics for that. And so we've taken something that was hugely valuable to people, and we've kept it. And then we've added all this fantastic new stuff. And a student following me is going to do a better job on the glacier than I did. Probably without throwing away some of what I did, but certainly in improving it. And so it is always improvable, but it keeps the useful parts.
So you don't feel diminished by the fact that you're going to be in a dustbin somewhere, mostly after the.
No, it is a pleasure to see the students do that.
We could at least put you in a freezer that works.
There you go.
I like this idea because I think it gets also back to this notion that teaching students to remember all of these facts, and that's the important thing about being a scientist, is in a way a misrepresentation of the kind of person you need to follow in your footsteps.
Right. We would like them to stock their memory with enough facts that are on quick access, that they know what they need to disprove and what they need to improve. But after that, get busy.
So then where does this notion come that we have to be, presenting scientists as knowing things and expert and unassailable? I mean, it seems like the problem may be that audiences are different. Like within the scientific audience, you know that we're dealing with vulnerable people talking to vulnerable people. But then you have the audience when you go to Congress and testify, you don't really want to sit there and be too vulnerable. So how do you balance that? You've got different audiences with different takes on your role.
Yeah, and it really does involve figuring out who the audience is and what they need. If you are interested in things breaking, fracture mechanics is real. And the people that designed this building understood it really fantastically well, and they are experts, and they can say you must build the beam this thick or your building will collapse, and that's a fact. Do it, get on with it. But if you're interested in whether the front of the glacier is going to break, there's new things to learn. And I can go to a class, a bunch of students, and say, this is what I don't know, and this is how you can improve it. And I can go to Congress and I can say, look, if that cliff of the glacier is too high, it will break, and I will guarantee you that. And both of those are right, and I hope they're the right thing for that audience, because the student is supposed to improve it, but the congressional staffer is supposed to know that we can get into a situation that will be bad.
Now, maybe you should be more like the oracle at Delphi or something, and maybe there should be a musical accompaniment or something that... Is there a way to humanize that message without taking away from the authority of it?
We certainly try to humanize the message. I think that we were chatting yesterday that something like 70% of Americans say that they cannot name a living scientist. I think we need to humanize a little. It would be good if we scientists knew more non-scientists, and if more non-scientists knew us, because the human struggle for knowledge, we can use their help. We can use their students, and we believe that we are giving them something that is worth what they invested in us, but we owe them that, and this has to be humanized.
How do you do it, though? What would you say is the best way to... I mean, everybody does it differently?
I think it is everybody does it differently. I think a commitment from us that when we are funded by the public, when we are supported by the public, they are supporting our scientific papers, but that's not really what they want. They want what's useful and they want what's cool. And we actually were funded to get them those results, not another scientific paper. And that means that we owe them somehow finding a way to make this information useful to them. And it's way easier to be useful if we know each other and we trust each other. And so it is a commitment from us to supply to the people what they paid for, and a commitment to us to be nice to our neighbors because we actually like them. And then how do we do that? You know better than I do, but do it your way. Whoever you are. Okay.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah. In the way that there's a message of humility there. I suppose trust and humility aren't quite the same thing, but it's like I don't trust people who aren't humble because I think something's missing. They're hiding something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're completely right about that. And we do know it is possible to become such an expert that you start believing yourself on things that you aren't quite an expert in. And there's a real danger in that.
What's cool about weather? We talked about this, but we didn't really get down to I'm just curious, because I may have a different sense of it than you do, of what's actually cool about it.
Yeah.
What to you is cool
Right,
about it?
so I mean, there's the easy stuff, huge, dramatic, big things. You see something that's bigger than you, and it's exciting. But there's all the, I work on ice crystals. And if you go and you start looking, you go up to Greenland in the summer when the sun is shining, and it'll get just below the surface. It gets a few degrees warmer than the air is, and then vapor starts moving out, and then at night the vapor moves in, and you go back the next day and you look, and these little wind-rounded snow grains have turned into these beautiful crystal-faced hopper crystals of depth ore, and they're just, the sun glints off of them, and they just are jewels that have just grown there, and that's just cool. Okay? Yeah. And it's all around you, and so you start looking. If you were in Greenland with me at that time, at night you'd get these fogs would come in. So the sun is not setting, but the sun gets low, and all day the sun has been heating the surface and the vapor has been going up in the air, and the sun gets low and the temperature drops 30 degrees, and you get this fog. And there's little tiny droplets, and they make a rainbow, but they're not big enough to separate the colors, so it's this ghostly gray fog bow arc. And then that starts breaking down into beautiful little crystals of ice that glint in the sun and fall out. And as the fog is blowing past the volleyball net we set up, the water is growing these glorious horrors sticking upwind out of the volleyball net. And by morning, the volleyball net is just cast in this ghostly fingers of ice telling you which way the wind was going. It's just cool. I'm sorry, this is way cool.
I think there's something about being a scientist maybe that requires enthusiasm, but of a different kind than many of us. Maybe you can help me with this. It seems like a lot of people are enthusiastic about cool things, but they move on to the next cool thing over and over again. But to be a scientist, that's not really the way you work, right? I mean, you have to stick with something a really long time.
You do indeed, right?
But it's still cool.
It is still cool, but
How is that?
It's what really was going on there. I mean, you know this story, right? There's snow out there, and then it rains, and then the snow melts. And then you're sitting here, somebody says, oh, the rain melted the snow. And you say, no, it didn't. The rain made it humid, and then it condensed on the surface, and that melted the snow, right? And it took somebody a huge amount of effort to get it right. And then you say, wow, now I really understand, and this is knowledge I can use, and I can now make my predictive ability better, and I can actually say that the snow will melt if a really humid air mass comes in, and it doesn't have to rain. And so it's getting those layers of complexity that give you knowledge and power over it. You pick a topic, and you stick with it a little bit because you know that there's something really interesting under the surface. And the one on top, the one that captured your interest, is actually not as cool as the one underneath.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. There's a lot of insights. Was there something that I should be asking you that I didn't about how to humanize and put a human face on science that you've learned?
It's just the commitment. It is, we as scientists have to really care about things. We have to get into the energy fluxes and the mass fluxes and the vorticity but we as scientists have to keep remembering for ourselves that ultimately this is caring about people. And I think we actually do. I think our community, I think the weather community is really fantastic about this. The fact that the weather community goes from the hardest of hard research to saving people's lives and forecasting on TV. You get it. But we just need to keep reminding ourselves that when you're really deep in the differential equation, that this is going to save somebody's life and help their well-being.
We want to thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of AMS on the Air. Don't miss any of our episodes. Remember, you can subscribe using your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, give us a rating. We'd love to hear from you, and also follow us on social media.
For Irene, Dakota, and myself, thanks for listening. And we'll catch you next time on the air.
Happy weather.
Happy penguins.